Hey friends, so today we're going to be making some homemade sourdough buns. I'm going to start off with grabbing my ingredients. So I'm going to go ahead and get 200 millimeters, 200 milliliters of, this is 2% milk. And you can use whole milk if you like, but me and my family just prefer to drink 2% milk, so that is what we are using. Okay, now I'm just heating up my milk and I'm getting a 1/4 cup of cold butter ready. The reason why I'm using cold butter is I want to help cool down my milk mixture before I add my yeast. I don't want a chance at killing it, so I'm just going to let it sit and do its thing. Now I'm going to measure out 400 grams of all-purpose flour. And you can use bread flour if you like. I just prefer to have all-purpose flour on hand. And so I'm just going to go ahead and measure that out. Okay, and now we're just going to go ahead and add the salt. And I'm adding 8 grams of salt. And as any of you bread bakers know, you definitely always need to add salt to your bread. Otherwise, it's going to taste like literally nothing. So I'm going and adding my 8 grams. And it's really handy to have a kitchen scale. Now I'm just going to add some milk powder. And this is low-fat milk powder. And it's going to be 20 grams of milk powder. You can always use whole fat if you like. And the reason why I like adding milk powder is it helps to keep the buns softer for longer. And it also adds some pretty good flavor too. As you can see, I'm just very carefully weighing it out. So I'm just going to mix this well. I like getting my dry ingredients ready first, just so I know that I didn't forget anything. And now I'm going to give my milk mixture a stir again. As you can see, I still have a little bit of cold butter in there, but that'll be fine. It'll melt eventually. And now I'm going to add 1 whole egg. And this just adds some richness and some extra protein. And then I'm adding sugar. This is optional if you want, but like I said, it also adds a really good flavor. It helps retain some moisture. So now I'm just giving this a good stir. Just want to make sure I try and incorporate that egg before I go ahead and add everything else to it. I definitely like to mix very well. It helps with the mixing process once it's time to bring everything together. So I'm putting my measuring cup back onto the scale because I'm going to measure out my yeast. And as you could tell, it's very active. It's definitely more than doubled in size. Smells really good and it's nice and bubbly. So I'm going to add 100 grams of this active sourdough starter. If I'm making just a plain sourdough loaf, I use less, but when I have an enriched dough, I like to add a little bit more of my sourdough starter just because it helps things come along a little quicker. So I'm at the 100 grams, and I'm just going to go ahead and set my sourdough starter off to the side. And I also want to give this a really good mix. This helps just disperse the yeast into the liquid, so when I mix it into my dry ingredients, I have a good mixture to go into my dry ingredients. So you can see I'm just going to give it a good mix. And you don't have to mix for too long. I just like to mix it until I get all of the flour incorporated in. It's going to be a fairly shaggy dough, but yeah, it'll definitely all come together once you start to do your stretch and folds. So I just like I said, I just like to mix it until I know that all of my dry ingredients have been incorporated into my wet ingredients. So now I'm just gonna cover my dough and let it sit for a little while. And this is my first set of stretch and folds. I usually have my husband help me just to hold the bowl. As you can see, I'm just bringing each corner in to each other. And then what I like to do is try and flip it around. And when I do flip it around, I like to pull it a little bit on each other just to shape it into a nice ball. And then I'll go ahead and let it sit. And as you can tell, it's already starting to get a little bit smoother on the top. And this is how I like to do my stretch and folds as I get farther along, because the dough starts to become a bit more elastic. And as you can see, it's getting even more smooth on top. And this is my third and final round of stretch and folds. As you can see, it's definitely smoother. It's more pliable. Yeah, I'm just doing like the long stretch and folds just so I can develop some gluten in there. And I'm bringing it back together, and that's my final stretch and fold. So now I'm going to give that a cover, and I'm going to let that bulk ferment in the refrigerator just because it is later in the day. And so this is the next day, and I am going to be shaping our buns. So I like to start off with dusting my counter with a bit of flour just so things don't stick so much. And this is a very sticky dough, so I tend to put a little bit more flour than I would for, just like a regular dough. And as you can see, it's nice and fluffy. I'm just using my scraper to get everything out. And you can see the gluten strands in there. The dough looks really nice. And so I'm just going to pat it out a little bit, just so I can try and get an even shape on these doughs. On these rolls or buns, whatever you want to call them. And I'm just flipping it over just because I wanted to get some more flour on there so the dough didn't stick so much to my countertop. And I'm just rolling this so I can try and get pretty even size buns. They're not going to be perfect, but they're pretty close. So, and as you can see, I cut them into 8 pieces. And now I'm just going to add a little more flour to the ends that where it's sticky. And I'm cupping them with my hands, but I decided to go back in there and kind of give them a fold and try and help them along a little bit. Sorry, that got really loud. That was my dog. So I'm just going to keep doing the same thing for all of these buns. I'm just kind of breaking things back onto each other and squeezing the ends, and then I'm coming back and tightening them up. I used to find this very tedious when I first started making bread, but I've gotten quicker at it, and it's actually become soothing to me, especially if I get up in the morning and there's no one up. I have a little bit of time to myself to just kind of unwind and just get that nice quiet time by myself. And doing this, something repetitive and easy, definitely helps. And as you can see, I'm putting a little bit extra flour when I'm done shaping the buns. It's just because I don't want them to stick to my countertop. As you can see, they're a nice shape. They definitely want to try and tighten them up. Sorry, I'm just going back to double check to make sure that they're not sticking. Yep, as you can see, I'm just dusting the ends, flattening down my dough, bringing both sides together, and then, well, actually all 4 poles I'm bringing together, and then I just tighten the bottom, kind of pinch everything together, and then go ahead and start cupping them with my hands to tighten them up a bit. And like I said before, I used to not enjoy doing this, but I've actually come to really like it. And once you get more comfortable making bread, it just becomes second nature. I used to be terrified to make cinnamon rolls, and I always thought it was this huge production, because in my head I would kind of psych myself out and be like, oh, this is going to be so tough. You have to make the dough, then you have to roll out the dough, then you have to add the cinnamon sugar, and then you have to proof it again. And once I started taking things one step at a time, one day at a time, I realized it's really not that tough. It's just, honestly, if you're mentally prepared, or you're mentally preparing yourself for it to be hard, then it's going to seem a lot harder than it is. But like I said, if you just take things one day at a time, one step at a time, it really is so much easier. And so now here I am on my last roll. And I'm surprised that things actually went surprisingly well. Sometimes I have a hard time. Sometimes you'll see one certain bun give me a hard time, but this time everything went together fairly smoothly. So now that I have all of my buns ready, I am going to get my baking sheet And I just have a baking sheet lined with some plain old parchment paper. And I'm just going to line them up. I don't mind if they touch during the baking process, just because they'll pull together plenty easy. So I'm trying to make them as even as I can. And now I'm just going to flatten them out. You want to try and flatten these out as much as you like, just because they are going to be more of a hamburger bun. And so I don't want a huge, like, dome-shaped bun. If you were making, like a dinner roll or like a hot cross bun or something, it's definitely fine to leave it that big and dome shaped. But since we're making hamburger buns, I want to try and flatten them out so I'm able to pop them in the toaster if needed. And so now I am just going to grab some olive oil to pat onto the top, just so they don't dry out in the proofing process. And as you can see, I'm flattening them out even more. Oh, actually, I'm not using olive oil. I'm just using plain old vegetable or canola oil. You could use olive oil if you like. This is just what I had handy, so I went ahead and did that. And you definitely don't want to skimp on this step, just because you want to make sure your buns stay nice and soft. You don't want it to get any crusty edges. I mean, if you like that, you could try. But, yep, I'm just letting them proof now. And now they've been proofed for a little while. As you can see, they've probably doubled in size. And I went ahead and gave them an egg wash, as you can see from the little puddles around the sides. So now I'm just getting ready to put them into the oven. And I'm baking them at a lower heat at about 350, just because I didn't want them to overbake and I didn't want them to be too brown or too crusty. And I ended up baking those for 25 minutes. And so here they are. They're going to be coming out of the oven. Sorry, I'm taking a while to go ahead and grab them. But there they are. Our nice homemade from scratch buns. As you can see, they're a light golden brown. They look really pretty. And I'm just going to sit them there and let them cool completely. As you can see, I'm giving them a poke test to show how soft they are. But you definitely want to cool them completely before you cut them. You just want to make sure that it's not doughy inside, and that's how prevent it. And I forgot to film while I was cutting them, but yeah, this is what they look like. You can see it has a nice green structure. It smells really, really good. So I just wanted to thank you guys for hanging out with me. I hope you have a wonderful, blessed day. And I hope you give this recipe a try. Thank you so much. See you next time.